Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very thought-provoking show coming right up with special guest, Dr. Andrew Lam, and he's here today to share with us his new novel, Repentance. His previous books include Saving Sight, which is about his career as an eye surgeon, and Two Sons of China, a novel of World War II that won the Forward Review Book of the Year award in 2014. He's currently an assistant professor at the University of Massachusetts Medical School and at Tufts University School of Medicine. So let's welcome to the show, Dr. Andrew Lam.
Thanks very much, Marianne.
What a pleasure it is to have you here, and of course to talk about your new book. I hear it's getting some great reviews, and as an author, you have to be so excited about that.
I appreciate that. It's always exciting when your book comes out, especially because usually these things take a really, really long time to come to fruition. So it's definitely kind of a labor of love, most authors will tell you.
Well, and as we introduced you, you are a doctor. So how did you get into writing?
That's a good question. I think my English teachers in high school probably would have been a little shocked to learn that I became an author. I wasn't really somebody who ever dreamed that writing or writing books would be something that I would ever pursue. But everybody from when I was young knew that my passion was history, American history, military history, and it's my love of history that got me into writing because I studied history in college, and then I went to medical school because I wanted to be a physician. I knew that could be a very fulfilling career, but I never lost my desire to share history with others, and it's my goal to share lesser-known aspects of American history that aren't that well-known but really deserve to be more well-known, and that's what all of my books have basically been about.
Well, I'm sure your teachers would just love to hear about all the books that you've written. I mean, because you're an award-winning author, so congratulations, and then also being here you are a doctor as well, and there's just so much that you have on your plate. It's interesting that you even find time to write.
Well, people do ask me about where the time comes from a lot. I think it's probably the most common question I get. But I think that the reality is that if you become passionate about something in your life, then you kind of just make time. So everybody I know has passions. It may be running. There's so many people I know run marathons. It's just mind-boggling to me. Or they're really into physical fitness, or they love cooking and all these different things. And you just kind of make time for things that you love. And for me, I have 4 kids, and I spend a lot of time just at their practices or other activities. I'm literally just waiting for them, just writing or brainstorming or doing other things that authors do. So you just kind of find time to do the things you like. And I used to watch a movie every night, and I found out that if you stop doing that, you have a lot of time, like after the kids go to bed. So that can be very helpful.
Well, that's great for our aspiring writers who are looking to start developing their own writing practice, how they can get in and carve out the time within their schedule to go ahead and do that. So I have to ask for Repentance here. I mean, wow, what an amazing book. When you wrote this, I mean, what was the thread that had you so interested in this book that you had to write this book?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. So for me, the writing starts with a topic in history that fascinates me. And in this case, it was about these Japanese-American World War II heroes who had faced a lot of discrimination and prejudice because of anti-Japanese hysteria during World War II, obviously because Japan was our enemy. But these were Americans most of them had been born in America and were citizens. And despite that, they were, especially in the West Coast, California, and Washington, Oregon, they'd been interned in camps like Manzanar with their families. And yet, even though their civil rights and citizenship rights had been violated, a whole lot of them volunteered to fight for America. And the reason they did that was because they wanted to prove that they were loyal, that they were just as American as anybody else. And this group, which was called the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, believe it or not, became the most decorated unit in U.S. military history. They fought with such valor in Italy and in France that they became really, really well known. They won 21 medals of honor. There were ultimately, at any one time, there were about 3,000 or 4,000 of them in the unit, but because of the war, there were replacements and stuff. And of the 14,000 who ultimately served with them, let's check this, 9,486 of them, 9,486 Purple Hearts were awarded. I mean, these guys basically fought sacrificially. They had something to prove, and it's a great American story. And that was really what I wanted the historical basis of the book to be about.
Why do you think so little people know about the 442nd?
I think that, for one thing, it's a challenge to get people interested in history. You know, I think I was one of the only kids in my school who just totally loved history. Believe it or not, a lot of people don't think history is like the greatest thing since sliced bread. A lot of people don't like learning dates. They think history is boring. Some of my own kids, to my chagrin, feel the same way. And I think that we live in a world that has so many easy distractions. I just finished binge watching The Americans, for example. That's 60 hours of my life that are gone. You know, so I think we live in a day where there's so much instant gratification when it comes to entertainment that being studious, caring about history is a challenge. But I do think that people do love American history, and especially as we get older, we appreciate the world we live in and the sacrifices made from the people who came before us. So, you know, I think that the 442nd is kind of an unmined aspect of World War II. It's like a gem that people don't know that much about, and I think they love to know more. That's why I thought it was a very, very good foundation for my book.
Well, I'm so glad that you wrote this book and brought it to the spotlight. You know, a lot of people aren't very aware of internment camps that happened during that time, and it's interesting. There's that kind of old saying, if we, neglect our history and learning about our history, we're doomed to repeat it. And you can kind of see some of that in today's atmosphere that we have going on. So I think it's real important for people to really gain an understanding of what happened during that time.
Yeah, I think it is actually a very timely part of history to remember. I mean, you have to realize that of the over 110,000 Japanese Americans were interned. That means they were basically forced to leave their homes and their businesses, all of which they kind of lost everything because they had no time to sell them, really. People basically, predatory buyers were coming to buy their stuff for like pennies on the dollar, and then they were imprisoned essentially indefinitely in these camps. And 2/3 of them were American citizens. You know, these weren't like illegal immigrants. They were actual American citizens, and half of them were kids. So to think that they were truly a military threat was really kind of not realistic. And of course, we all know that at no time during all of World War II was there one act of espionage or sabotage committed by one Japanese American person. So it was, in retrospect, obviously a terrible mistake. You know, it's FDR's decision to allow this to occur scarred his legacy. And our country has apologized. You know, Carter specifically apologized. Reagan in 1988 actually made reparation. There was a Civil Liberties Act of 1988 that gave reparations to surviving people who had been interned. But of course, that doesn't really come close to accommodating for like the lost lives. Many people, elderly especially, committed suicide because they lost everything they'd worked for their entire life. It's a tragedy. But the great thing about our country, I think, is that we often will come to terms with our mistakes. And I think it's just important to teach our children and future generations that this happened, and we've got to remember it because we don't want it to happen again, just as you said.
Yeah, definitely not. Well, and, this book is so beautifully written. How long did it take for you to do the research on this book?
Yeah, with these books, it's kind of like a lifetime of research in the sense that I read a lot of history books. I always have, and it's kind of like that fund of knowledge that allows you to come up with what happens. And then, of course, when you really get down to the nitty-gritty of the story, you do spend, significant time, better part of a year, reading all the books you can find on it. And the internet is very helpful. I mean, literally, when you're trying to get as detailed as like how many cylinders does a German army truck have, you can use the internet and find stuff like that, or what was in the rations of Japanese American soldiers in eastern France in 1944. The internet's amazing, and that can be very helpful, especially when it comes to like munitions and tactics and what people wore in the internment camps and all these different things. So it's very, very helpful.
Thank goodness we live in the age we do, where we can, have all that information kind of right at our fingertips. Yeah, but I also understand that you have met personally with some of the veterans of the 442nd.
Yeah, that's right. I was, I guess if you ask me when my kernel of an idea started for this, I was lucky to do my medical internship in Hawaii. That was the best year of my life. Like, if you just erased all the books I've ever written, my kids, like the year I went with my wife to Hawaii and learned all about medicine and spent a lot of time on the beach and everything and playing golf, it was the best year of my life. But one thing that happened while I was there was I would meet veterans of the 442nd because many of them came from Hawaii. I met one sitting at church one day. I would go to Pearl Harbor or the Punch Bowl Military Cemetery, and there would be like docents, and I would strike up conversations with them. And that's kind of where I first got introduced to these guys. So that's kind of where I had it as a kernel in my mind, essentially, that this would be a great topic someday.
And be able to move with that. Well, to be able to, meet the veterans, spend time with them and interview, I mean, that must have been so exciting and so heart-touching to really meet these heroes.
It is. I mean, I really befriended one particular veteran who is well known named Susumu Ito, Ito. And after the war, he became like a cell biologist and was a professor at Harvard Med School, which isn't far from where I live. So I met with him, and he showed me all his memorabilia, and we talked. And the average height and weight of these guys was like, I think they were like 5'3" and 125 pounds. Like they were small, okay? But they were ferocious, obviously, in battle. But you meet these guys, and they come across as gentle, and it's hard to believe to see them as warriors. And Dr. Ito basically told me that all through his career, nobody seemed to care really about his wartime heroics. It's not like they bragged about it, obviously. Most veterans are often reticent about their experiences. But after 2000 occurred, as he was getting on in years, and obviously as fewer and fewer World War II veterans are still with us, people started coming out of the woodwork to interview him. He was basically giving interviews left and right. He won the Bronze Star. He was awarded a Congressional Gold Medal. He actually had brought a camera to Europe, even though he wasn't supposed to, and he took so many wonderful pictures that it's the best collection, I believe, of photographs from their unit, and it's been exhibited in museums in California and elsewhere. So it was wonderful to meet him. I mean, he read Repentance, actually, and it was very fulfilling to know that he enjoyed it. He thought it was very realistic with regard to the part where I convey the battles that they experienced in France, etc. And one of the best things he showed me was his senninbari, which is Japanese soldiers. Of course, Japanese soldiers in Japan would all have this, but even some Japanese American soldiers had this, where it was a bit of a superstitious thing where you would have this band of cloth that you tie around your waist, and your mother or sisters, before you went to war, would get 1,000 red stitches in this white band of cloth, and each stitch was placed by a different mother or woman. And it's basically just, the idea was to give the soldiers a sense of confidence. It was supposed to protect you in battle, essentially. And he had this from when he went to war, and it was incredible just to see something like that. He had a lot of other things too, but a small New Testament he kept in his pocket the entire time. He was an incredible man. He unfortunately passed away in 2015, but he left a great legacy.
What a gift it must have been to spend that time with him and get to know him and hear his accounts firsthand.
It definitely was.
Well, we talked earlier about how you're a doctor. I mean, you're a surgeon. How did your career as a surgeon really influence your writing?
That's a good question. I think there are a lot of similarities, believe it or not, between being a physician and writing. In a sense, probably the most common thing is the believing in delayed gratification in both fields, because it takes a long time to be a doctor and it takes a long time to write a book. Basically, I think it's very important to write about what you know, right? So I write about history. I know about history. I'm a husband, father. I'm Asian American. All of those aspects find their ways into my writing. But also medical things find their way into my writing. So in this particular book, the basic gist of the book is that, there's a Japanese American World War II hero who has a secret about something terrible that happened during World War II. He's a hero, actually, but his secret's so bad he kind of refuses to talk about the war and the combat that made him a hero. And his son, in the 90s, so it's kind of a dual timeline story, and the son is actually a world-famous cardiac surgeon. And so that's a way I got to kind of enmesh my medical expertise and great stories from my training into it. We see this son of this Japanese-American war hero in the operating room, saving lives, being frustrated in surgery, having complications, facing death, all these things that, frankly, it's what, all doctors have amazing stories, probably ones some we would love to forget, others that make us, are formidable in our memory for forever. And this is kind of a creative way for me to convey these realistic things that occurred or things that I know could easily have happened.
Well, I think it brings a whole new perspective when you interweave the medical aspect with that, because it makes it much more than this two-dimensional. You're really bringing your characters into a three-dimensional being within the book. And I think that's part of the reason why you've also received such high praise for the book, because your characters, people feel like it's, like a friend or a loved one. You can really make that emotional connection.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, that is the goal. I think that, there's the history, but the book is really about a family. And my goal as a writer, I guess the greatest compliment a writer can get is that when a reader says that something in the book, reading your book, genuinely stirred some actual emotion in you, right? So nobody is going to write, my goal isn't to just write a history. It's actually to entertain somebody and with the story, but as a byproduct, learn the history and maybe even appreciate what these men went through, what their families went through in this unique part of American history and in this time.
Well, and, we don't want to go into the complete story of repentance because it is a historical novel and we want people to pick up their own copy. What would you like to share with our listeners about your book?
Sure. I can just tell you about the premise, of course, as I mentioned. The thing about it is lots of books and even movies have been made about the 442nd, and they laud them, which is appropriate. These guys won so many medals of honor, 560 silver stars, 4,000 bronze stars, 52 distinguished service crosses, etc. The most decorated unit in history, as I said. But I thought to myself, we're in some danger, for those who are in the know, of like putting these guys on a pedestal and forgetting that they're actual men who had the same fears and foibles and faults as all of us do. So I thought that I would kind of turn the story of the 442nd on its head, and instead of writing about a hero, I'd actually write about a coward. And I kind of alluded a little bit to it. Again, this book is about a war hero who won this big war medal, but he actually has this big secret about something that happened during the war. And the story is really about how his son, which is this world-famous cardiac surgeon named Daniel, how he suddenly starts to uncover all these secrets about himself, his family, his father's wartime actions. It happens because he becomes perplexed one day because the government suddenly comes calling, seeking details about a medal that his father won because something really bad happened in France while he was fighting the Germans, and the Department of Defense wants to kind of find out exactly who did what. And that's what compels Daniel to kind of embark on a quest for the truth, which takes him to California and to France. And he finally finds out all these things about his father. And yes, I don't want to give away any spoilers, but it's meant to be the page turner with many surprises, and again to highlight the 442nd. So, just shining a light on their history is really important to me. But obviously, I don't think the book would ever have succeeded or will succeed unless people feel like they understand the characters, they they feel connected to the characters, which is the important thing for anyone who writes historical fiction. It's the reason why we don't just write nonfiction about this, of course.
Well, and it really gives you a lot of latitude in regards to developing the characters and being able to move forward with a lot of different aspects of the story that sometimes wouldn't all be included in such a writing. One of the things that you include in your book, you talk about PTSD. Why was it important for you to include that?
Well, it's kind of like, again, war is glamorized by a lot of young men. Obviously, I know what that feels like. You know, I'm somebody who loves military history. I have a son who literally makes a weapon out of any possible inanimate object, and it's just something that fascinates people. But in reality, of course, we all know war is terrible, right? And American citizen soldiers have fought many wars, but really these citizen soldiers were people, school teachers, you know, blue-collar people who weren't trained in life to kill other people. And it's really, you know, our history in the military is citizen soldiers who are regular people who did this and were trained to do it. So in reality, men who come back from war suffer so many things that are not visible, and their families suffer too. And so when I was in medical school, one of the most memorable parts was when I did my psychiatry rotation at one of the flagship VA hospital in Philadelphia. So I'm, you know, in medical school, and a lot of these vets are Vietnam vets. And so I'm sitting there with them. They're talking about how depressed they are. They're having difficulty telling me about what they went through. It's not lost on me that some of them, it's a little awkward because I look like an Asian guy who used to be their enemy, essentially, and it was never really a big issue, but there's definitely like a lot of stuff below the surface sometimes. And you just realize after you've met with these men, some of them, frankly, whose lives have totally fallen apart, okay? Some of it not because of the military, but certainly there's times when their war experiences contributed to their lives taking a downhill turn and their lives being derailed because they were drafted and went to Vietnam. And so in my book, I just use this I use my characters, particularly the main character, Japanese-American war hero, to show what the effects of PTSD can be. So this is a guy who something terrible happened during the war, and it changed not only his life, but had a negative effect on his family's life for more than one generation. So I think that the realism there, you know, this isn't just your typical, as I said, laudatory war novel, basically saying all the 442nd veterans are heroes. Certainly the book conveys their history in a very positive way and draws attention to their sacrifice, but it's, I think, far more realistic than any other treatment of this subject has been from a fictional standpoint. I really appreciate not only your writing style, but the topics that you choose to cover in Repentance, because I felt like it was just a really honest accounting, even though we're looking at historical fiction. It was a really honest accounting of what that period in time was like. Thank you.
Well, you know, Andrew, I mean, we can talk about your book forever, but I don't want to give anything away. It's really so very just a beautifully written book. Where can our listeners connect with you? Of course. And, you know, where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community?
Sure. So probably the easiest way to reach out to me is my website, which is andrewlammd.com. andrewlammd.com. And there's a website, there's an email there that I love to respond to people. I love hearing from people all over the world about my other books that have touched them, and that's wonderful. I have a Facebook page, there's a link there as well. So yeah, I can't give medical advice. That's the one thing that I've had to tell people. Can't give medical advice unless I examine you. But one of my books it was about the amazing history of the people who had invented the techniques we use to save sight, like cataract surgery and LASIK surgery, and we're even implanting retina surgeons are even implanting microchips to bring sight back to blind people. So people have got wind of this, and sometimes I get interesting questions from all over the world regarding saving people's eyes, but I can't really do it Unless
not
I'd
there,
actually
yeah.
you as a patient, you know.
Well, they probably just need to schedule an appointment with you and see you as a doctor and move that from there. But, Andrew, Dr. Lam, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, Dr. Lam, it's been such an honor to spend this time with you. And again, if people are looking to connect with you to learn more about your books, they can at andrewlammd.com. Repentance is also available there and at Barnes & Noble and Amazon. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Mary Ann. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Mary Ann is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Mary Ann will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Mary Ann airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmaryann.com for more information.